Welcome to another morning of Culture Hour here on Mountain Stream TV. My name is Thomas Crowe, and this morning with me I have a guest whose name is Stephanie Quinn. Hi Stephanie, it's good to have you here.
It's nice to meet you.
You came all the way over from Asheville, and we thank you for driving over and spending an hour with us this morning and finding out more about the kind of things you've been doing with your music. And especially I'm interested in the CD that you've just released, something that you did years ago actually, and in the Great Pyramid in Egypt. It's very exciting, very interesting to me, but maybe we should start at the beginning. How did you get into music? What is your backstory in terms of your interest in music and how you came to be doing what you're doing at the present time?
Well, there's lots of stories to share about that. When I was about 5 years old, I played in a little recital, and there was no rehearsal for it. So when I got done with the last song of teaching little fingers to play, everybody clapped. And I got so excited. I went and played the whole book, one song after another. And they put me in the newspaper for that. So that was the first time I ever had any, shall we say, recognition about that. And I also was into Alice in Wonderland. And there's a scene in there with the witch, and I had a dream when I was a child that the Queen of Hearts, she said, the musicians, they're not counting! Off with their heads! And that was my dream. So when my piano teacher would tell me to count out loud, I always did. Oh. I think rhythm is very important. And I was very fortunate to have had some fabulous teachers. I auditioned to play on a Gagliano. It was alone, which is a violin that's now worth millions. And I won the audition, which gave me the teacher of George Perlman, who was my first primary violin teacher. He was a protege of Leopold Auer of the Russian school. His friend was William Browning, and his teacher was Carl Friedberg, who studied with Claire Schumann. You know who that is?
I know who that is.
Very well, very good. So I had some fabulous lineage right from the beginning in terms of my education. Soon after that, I auditioned for the Eastman School of Music along with some other schools, and because that one had a dormitory, and that one accepted me on both piano and violin because I was proficient on both, I decided to go there. There I studied with Professor Castleman. I studied also with Malcolm Stewart, who was practicing with me about 3 hours a day. Much of what I know now came from that. After that, I auditioned for Felix Gallimere and spent 2 years studying with him in New York City. So those were my primary teachers.
I'd say you had a pretty good start.
Yeah, very fortunate.
Yeah. And where did that take you from there? Now, how old were you during this time with your teachers? Were you out of school already or still in school?
No, I was in school.
Yeah. And then after the high school years, you went to, where did you study to get any advanced education in that sense? Or did you not? Did you go?
Well, I was taking lessons from the age of 5 on, and violin from 9. And there was no school orchestra, so I started a little one with my students.
You've always kind of been a self-starter, and
I would say so.
Not necessarily going the traditional route, which would make sense in terms of your time in Egypt with that whole story. So, classical music. I mean, is that your real passion, or do you like all forms of music?
Well, I love classical music. I especially like Beethoven. I like many kinds of music. And I listen to different types of music. And I think it feeds into it.
Do you do a lot of composing yourself?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. And I know you've played with a lot of different symphonies and orchestras, and one of the things that I've noticed in looking into your history is you have some kind of a connection with Paul Winter. What's the story with Paul Winter? Because I know Paul Winter, and
you do?
I've done some things with his band in my my literary history.
Oh,
And so I'm curious to know what kind of connection you might have with him or his music. Or,
oh, wow. Well, when I was in New York City, I was with a group that performed in Carnegie Hall. And when I was there, Bert Stern and Henry Wolf were in the audience. They were friends of mine. They said, "Hey, what are you doing tonight?" And I said, "I'm going to be playing in Carnegie Hall." And their eyes popped open, and they both decided to go.
Mm-hmm.
So I played with this group there for a number of months. And then something happened, and I stopped playing the violin. It was a sexual harassment type of thing. And my heart was broke. After spending my whole childhood in a practice room, practicing for hours, to have it all come to this, seriously broke my heart. And I put my violin up in the top of my closet and didn't touch it for a long time. Then I met a musician named Turil Pashian from Armenia. And he was in town for a celebration of the 40th anniversary of the United Nations. And it had a huge influence on me. And I learned about meditation and yoga and being a vegetarian and consciousness. And it was very exciting to interact with him. And he said, "You must play your music again. Would you play for world peace?" And I said, "Yes, I would." I said, "Who do I meet?" He said, "Well, that might be New Age music. Why don't you see if you can connect with Paul Winter?" So I contacted Paul Winter. And I said I was interested in playing music with people who were interested in consciousness and peace. He said, "Well, why don't we get together and play some music?" I said, "That sounds great. What should I bring?" He said, "Nothing. We're going to improvise." And part of me said, "What's that?" But I knew what it was, and I was terrified.
Yeah.
And so he suggested that we meet at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine.
Right.
And I think it was 7 or 8 in the morning. He was doing one of his albums, and that day I also met Chris Brown, who was one of the early technicians on the album that I composed in the Pyramid. So Paul and I got together, and he said, "There's just one rule, there's no wrong notes." And he gave me a little guidelines. He said, "Let's do it on the pentatonic." I said, "Which one?" And he told me which one. And he said I could use that recording for anything I wanted. He was very, very generous. And our encounter was maybe 20 minutes. Then he invited me to his summer camp. You know about the summer camp?
Well, I've heard about it. Yeah.
It's up in Litchfield, Connecticut.
Right.
And the river and the streams are full of garnets and mica, and it sparkles everywhere. And musicians would make a xylophone bridge and pound on it, and things were hanging from the trees, and I thought it was the most marvelous thing. And we were intense, and I had my French violin with me, and we got flooded. I could have ruined the whole thing. I just remembered that. But it got to the case, but didn't quite touch the violin before I woke up terrified, running through all the rain with my violin to the main house.
Mm-hmm.
And there were some workshops that had a huge impact on me. And it was with the voice and Susan Osborne. I love Susan Osborne. And I heard things with the voice and with people that struck a deep chord in me. And after that experience, I thought, okay, she's at Z, but how do we get non-musicians to come in unified tones, like Plato had talked about? How do we do that with people who are not musicians, who have no exposure whatsoever to it? And I started having these peculiar dreams that showed me how to go like from A to M, and how to get a group together and create emotional unity through the vocal sounds. So Paul Winter kick-started all that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, "Why don't you go with me to Israel? Let's bring the Jews and the Palestinians together. Let's make song circles." He didn't want to do it.
Oh, really?
He wasn't interested.
They eventually did do that sort of thing, him and his group, go to Israel.
Oh, really?
Fairly recently, I think. But I used to play with those guys once in a while. Eugene Friesman was a good friend of mine. He was in a band that I had, a spoken word music
Was he
band.
the organist?
No, he's a cellist.
Oh, okay. It was the other guy I knew.
Oh, was it Paul Sullivan or no? It was Paul Halley.
Paul Haley?
Well, his name is Halley, but he was the pianist. I mean, the
Yeah,
keyboardist
he was the organist.
for a long
met
time.
him.
Yeah, he's not with them anymore, but I did some concerts with him up in Detroit, and we did things around here sometimes and all that. So it was pretty fun. Yeah, yeah.
He's
So
a great guy.
Well, let's go right to the source of this thing that I'm interested in. The Saqqara Suite, the album. Here's the cover for the CD, and it's a picture of you and a picture of the Sphinx in Egypt. Tell us what is the history of this whole project? I know it was recorded in 1967. Is that right, or sometime in the 60s?
No, it was in the 80s.
When you went to the pyramid?
Yeah.
It was in the 80s.
It was for the harmonic convergence.
Oh, okay.
And according to the Mayan calendar and the alignment of the planets, everybody was going to these power spots. And prior to this, shortly after my peace trips to Israel, I had a real bad car accident. And I don't know how I got through that, but I did. And on the way from Hawaii back to New York, stopped in LA to meet someone named Fadl Gad. And he had a tour going to Egypt. And the description of the tour was something that I had in my dreams. And I thought, I got to get on that tour. But it was filled up. So I carried on, went back to New York City, recovering from some injuries, some serious injuries. And about 10 days before the trip, they called me up and he said, there's a cancellation and there's an opening. And I said, okay. So I went, and I hadn't really played much on the violin. I had whiplash and, different injuries, but I was walking without a cane at that point. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to go. And there were some other musicians on the trip. And the idea was that on the night of the harmonic convergence, we were all going to go in the pyramid and record and make music. And so I brought my violin. Mm-hmm. And while I was there, I spent a lot of time at Saqqara, which was very inspiring. And while I was there, melodies were floating around in my head. And I started writing them down and doing sketches. So, am I answering the question?
Yes.
Did I get lost?
No. I wanted to know the whole
the progression, yes.
How it all came together, and then we'll talk about the experience too. But
yeah.
So you're at Saqqara, which is the old pyramid, one of the old pyramids, or maybe one of the oldest large pyramids. And then how did you get into the Great Pyramid? There's a story there.
Yeah, there's a story there. Well, as I said, we were all going to go there, mm-hmm. but everyone disappeared. We were supposed to play a cultural exchange concert mm-hmm. at the Sphinx. And before that, I thought I'd take a ride on one of the Arabian horses and go bareback for the first time. So I always wanted to look like, I was always inspired by Lawrence of Arabia, so I got that galabia, and I put a headscarf on, and I rode bareback for the first time, and had a wonderful time. And I picked up the horse around 5 o'clock, and then I got lost in the desert there. And I found a group, and then he said, you need to get back for the concert. I said, okay. I went to the hotel, got my violin, and we're waiting and waiting and waiting. The Egyptian band just keeps going on, and it's a concert in front of the Sphinx. And I thought, I think I want to get in front of there's a special place on the paws of the Sphinx, which are, I think, 50 feet long, and it's the stela. And I wanted to get in front of the stela. But I couldn't leave the violin, and I had the galabia on. So I approached this man near the front of the audience, and I said, I'd like to go over there. Could you be my bodyguard? And he said, sure. And he was kind of cute. And so I said, okay, great. So I'm climbing through all the scaffolding. We get there, and I started to play the violin, and he took these pictures, which are on the album. Mm-hmm. So that was a few hours before the recording. Then that was done, and we came back and waited another period of time. And then all the other musicians that we were supposed to join them, they took off. And only one was left, this Mexican ukulele player named Mazat. I said, Mazat, what are we going to do? And he says, we're going to do the gig. I said, all right, where's everybody else? And he said, well, they wanted the publicity. So they left because it's midnight and we wouldn't make the news. I said, okay. So we carried on and we got up in front of everybody and played with the Egyptian band and improvised and, just had a great time. And afterwards, the concert was over and everybody's hanging out in this plaza. So I said, what should we do? And he said, what do you want to do? I said, well, let's do some song circles. So I taught 2 songs, and there were about 500 people there, and we were all holding hands. And then I said I did 1 song, I'd sing it for you if you like, and I turned around and Mazet had disappeared. Then I sang the 2nd song, and then things started to dwindle away. I suppose people were going to go sleep. I'd been up since 4 in the morning with just a little nap before the horse ride. Then Fadl Gad found me and he says, well, let's go over to the pyramid. You want to go in? I said, everybody's gone. What are we going to do? And he says, go make music. I said, I need other people to improvise. He says, you've been sketching the music. Just go in there and do it. I said, okay. So he gets ready to close the door. And I said, well, aren't you coming in? He said, no, I'm tired. He said, I'm going to go back. So that's when I got in the pyramid by myself.
And so after you were in the pyramid, then what happened? I mean, now we're getting to the crux of the story. I mean, after listening to the album, I know of Paul Horn's famous album, Inside the Great Pyramid with his flute. And that was a classic album back in those days. And I look at this and I look at the picture of you there. You're about, it was very close to the same time period. And I'm thinking, wow, if you had made this album then, you would have been the first woman to do that in the pyramid. And the publicity would have been enormous. And you would have been an international star. But so okay, so you're and I love the music, by the way. Paul Horn's album is it's okay, it's okay. It was more of an anomaly. It was, the first guy to do something crazy like that as a jazz musician. But I really actually enjoyed. I thought your album was more powerful. It was more complicated. It was more spiritual, if you want to say that. So what was your experience like being alone inside the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid?
Thank you for those kind words.
Yeah, no, I'm serious. Yeah.
And by the way, I'm still the first female.
Hey, nice.
It's not too late.
Right.
It's not too late.
Yeah.
I can tell, when I was testing out I had a Sony Walkman, as a professional, and not thinking that something this important was going to happen. I did testing, 1, 2, 3, testing, and then I heard this huge bang, and it just scared the wits out of me. And I can read a little bit from my journal, if you don't mind,
No,
because
okay.
it's fresh. If I try to remember it, if you want it really to sound my impressions at that time, I think this might be the best way to do it. Fear, nauseous, my knees sore. I'm immobile, afraid to get up and walk. Maybe I will stop breathing. I am out of control. And I observe myself allowing it. A test of my ability to direct my consciousness. I face it, and a moment later I am calm. Next, I relax. I observe my thoughts and notice they are amplified, loud, and vocal. I shut my eyes. I see vivid image in my thoughts, so I watch the movie of my thoughts. I think about dying and how I could have died in Hawaii weeks ago. I'm not afraid of dying because I got close to it. I no longer fear death and no longer fear life or life. I know God is my life. I'm walking around the chamber. I feel its coolness. Daytime temperatures are exceeding 100 degrees Fahrenheit. No matter what the season, the king chamber is the same temperature. I inspect the quartz crystals. There's so much quartz in the granite walls. What do I hope to accomplish in here? I'm all by myself. Well, I love to be the first to do anything. I heard instruments all sound the same in here. I'm irritated. I pledge to make my violin sound like as many different instruments as possible. with harmonics, pizzicato, spiccato, ricochet, flutato, and numerous other bowing techniques. The possibilities are nearly infinite. I have the next few hours. I better get to it quickly before the candle burns out. I plan to work with the reverberation resonances and bounce my melodies off the harmony that the chamber produces. I hope the recording equipment will capture the amazing experience in sound I am having. Now, I wrote that in present tense because that's how I write.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So those are my impressions. A little later, I feel an orchestra inside of me, and I'm trying to make it all come out of one instrument. It's like merging in gallop with Sultan. That's the horse. This chamber reverberation resonance merges with me. I'm playing the pyramid rather than playing inside the pyramid. I lay there inside the sarcophagus for at least an hour. It comes to my thought that many people who have lay in this same coffer had hoped to cure leukemia or other cancerous diseases. Is there something special here for meditation, for prayer? For many centuries, initiates did work in here, I believed. Perhaps this is where Jesus lay for 3 days, training for his resurrection. Is this like what musicians feel on the stage of Carnegie Hall, the magic in the atmosphere? Is it akin to the spirits of great musicians from the past coming present while we perform in Carnegie Hall? I feel a similar sense of awe. If we think something empowers our performance, does it make it so? Let's say a person's been told he's going to die soon. He's convicted in the medical court. He's afraid of dying. His thought is paralyzed to the point where it seems hopeless. So this person travels to Egypt, goes to the king chamber, where these same repetitious, nasty thoughts are amplified. His fears are larger than before. The fear of death brings on a physical sensation, like what happened to me when my knees became sore and I was afraid even to walk. So with the symptoms flaring up, the symptoms of dying flaring up, to the point where the person is face to face with deathly sensations, and then the life force kicks in. The person doesn't want to die and decides not to die. He fights hard to live, like I did in Hawaii. The former patient emerges from this nightmare with a fiery inspiration of rebirth and renewal of God's infinite power. Death is now seen to be a manifestation of lethal thinking, not a physical reality. Thus, the disease is now seen to be a manifestation of diseased thought as well. By changing the thought body, the physical body sheds the fear and thus the symptoms. The result is the body's going to do the normal thing it's supposed to do. It's supposed to live. I had flashbacks of the previous days, seeing the many temple drawings depicting the visual echo of the second, less physical body. Some call it the aura. So that's what I wrote.
Yeah, and so you started making music.
Yeah.
And how did that feel, and what did that sound like, and what was that experience for you?
Well, I have a recording of everything, and I actually listened to it prior to doing the album in case there was something else in there I wanted. Some tones seem to reverberate longer than others, so getting the melodies to get the right harmonies for the right amount of time, it took quite a lot of experimentation. Mm-hmm. So what you hear on the album is the last 40 minutes of it. Mm-hmm. There's an end where I say, that's it, and I didn't put it in there. But that I knew when it was done. Right. I knew when it was over, and then it was time to go into the sarcophagus. So I was trying to experiment with lots of different sounds.
Well, I think you succeeded because the resonances in your voice and in your instrument and the reverberations in the coming from the space that you were in there are very profound on the album. And I understand that you also had this friend, Mr. Brown, is that his name?
Chris Brown?
Yeah, in New York, who helped you with the production of the album that could really bring out the sound and really...
He actually didn't do anything. All he did... No. It's not been redigitized ever.
Really?
Even to now. So what you're hearing on the album is very pure, and I'll tell you the progression briefly.
Yeah.
Chris Brown, by the way, he passed away. Did you know that?
No. That must have been like last week or something.
No, because I wanted him to help me with this, and I only found was an obituary.
Oh.
And I made a few calls.
Okay.
Do you know Elliot Wadapian?
Yes, he used to be in my band.
Yeah, yeah. So Elliot kind of filled me in. It was a boating accident. Oh, I was really upset.
Wow.
So I just found it, and he died a couple of years ago, so I just found that out in February. Anyway, he said, this thing is really good. And he said, why don't we take your cassette and let me put it into a CD? So maybe it is digitized. I don't know the technology, I really don't. But he said there's a lot of background noise in there.
Right.
And he said, I didn't take anything out, I just left it as it is, as you recorded it.
So he didn't take any of that background noise?
No.
Well, maybe that's the key to the sound then. Why it's so...
Well, it still sounded great. In fact,
Yeah, that's what I
I
mean.
released it with this.
Mm-hmm.
And it's called Saqqara, Passage into Soul Realm. So if, in your review, you mentioned could have been 2 different albums.
Yeah, yeah.
And if I was going to do that, the Pyramid stuff maybe would be called Passage into Soul Realms because the titles suggest a passage, a journey, a spiritual journey. And then the other 20 minutes is an orchestration of some of this. And that might be called Saqqara's story because it's a synopsis. And there's a storyline
Right.
dealing with prejudice and racism.
So is the cassette only the Pyramid music?
Right, but it's not been cleaned up.
Right.
So several times I wanted to release, and whenever I would bring it to people, the expense involved was way more than I could handle.
Right.
And so it was really kind of a matter of money and resources. And I understand, I've been told that, like, back in 2008 when I tried to do it, the technology wasn't there yet. So this Christmas time, I felt a very strong inner push to release this. As I was hanging on to this so long, you're just going to have to let it go, let the chips fall as they may, because you need to make room to do something else. So I did. And on a fluke, I was looking for a new title because I didn't think this was going to work. So I called a friend of mine named Jeff Ben Bierman. I hadn't seen him in 27 years. And I said, listen, I want to run the title by you. And we've, corresponded a little bit here and there, He said, I'd love to. And he said, I'm dying to get involved in a creative project. And he got very involved. Getting a second opinion about what should be on the inside of the album, what colors to use and things like that. He was very helpful. Then it came to the time where I said, you listen to more music than I do. What genre is this? How do I classify this when I put this out on CD Baby? Well, he listened to about 10 seconds of it. And he called me and he said, you can't do it. It's dirty. It's filthy. It's got all this background noise and distortions and there's a ventilator fan or something going on in there. So here we go. So he said you can put a big disclaimer on it because if you don't put a disclaimer, you're going to get bad reviews. This thing's going to go nowhere. He said forget about it being used on a sound system for a ballet to do the story. Forget about that. Forget about it being used in film because it's awful. And that's the last thing on my bucket list. I'm halfway there now.
Right.
So the next morning he felt badly. So he knew this guy named Tom Spawn. Now, he didn't know him very well. They had just had a few beers in a neighborhood. And he called me. He said, Tom and I, it's President's Day. We're going to go into the studio. He's given me 2 hours. And we're going to just play around with Chris Brown's originals. And see what he can do to clean it up. Well, the 2 guys were having a bromance. And they're having an absolute ball of this thing. So he decided to stay on the project all the way to the end. He liked the music, apparently. And he pro bonoed many, like over 30 hours.
Wow.
Because the frequency of the fan had lots of different pitches in it. If you take that out, it takes it out of my voice. And I'm doing a little polyphonic singing in there, and it takes those certain timbres out of the sound of the violin. And he had a technology to be able to take it out specifically. He could separate I guess, separate the fan noise from what I was doing. I don't know. But it had to do with this little micro, teeny tiny piece of sound time. And then he did a program to take it out of that whole section.
Mm-hmm.
So, voila.
Amazing, yes.
Wound up with something great.
Yeah.
And I'm really thrilled, and I'm really happy, and I'm blessed. And as I was told in Egypt, I was told that Egypt had a gift back from me because I did something good there that we're not talking about today. But I did something very good.
Yeah.
And the Dr. Hawass sent somebody to come to me, and he said, Egypt has a gift for you. And I believe that that was the gift. It was Tom Spahn and Jeff Bierman coming together in New York, calling me on the phone to check things. I'd be in my car driving to a symphony job in Tennessee, and I'd be listening, and they couldn't hear me. They put it on a system so I could hear their work and working on it.
Right. It's amazing. I mean, it was destined to happen. I mean, you can't say that was a coincidence. I mean, those guys coming together and doing all that work and coming out with the kind of product that you've got. I mean, it's really fascinating. Is there any way that you could show us the polyphonic singing or some of the music that you were working on in the pyramid?
Sure. What I'll do is, I'm not really prepared to come in and play the themes and stuff. But maybe what I'll do is I'll sing one of the songs that I did in the big group and warm up with the polyphonic singing, because that's what I like to do to warm up my voice. I'm looking for something here. Dang, where is it? I'm a little nervous, so I'm just worried I'm going to forget the words to the song. Isn't that silly? That's what's going on right here. Well, looks like I'm going to wing it. Oh, here it is. So, just how I warm up my voice. A little deep breathing at first. We are alive like the earth is alive. We have the power to create our freedom. If we have courage, we shall be healers. Like the sun, we shall rise. If we have courage, we shall be healers. Like the sun, we shall rise. We are alive like the earth is alive. We have the power to create our freedom. If we have courage, we shall be healers. Like the sun, we shall rise. If we have courage, we shall be healers. Like the sun, we shall rise.
Well, that fits right into the theme of what the Canary Coalition is all about.
That's why I thought to do it. That's why I thought to bring it.
Yeah, that's perfect, you know, and
Earth Day and Jose Arguelles and Harmonic Convergence, you know, he started Earth Day.
Right, I remember that. That was a big deal for many years leading up to that. The way that you were just getting your voice tuned up and controlled is a lot like what's on the CD. That kind of polyphonic singing, is that what you call it?
Oh, it's called overtone singing.
Overtone, yeah.
And in New York, there was a guy named David Hikes, and he had recordings about this. And I had this dream that taught me how to do it. It said that the Egyptian Om was I-U-M, I-U-M. And in the, so shall we say, the lesson that I was having in the dream, it showed me just how to do it. And so I started talking about it in New York, and somebody said, well, you better talk to Hikes about that. He's the expert. And he said, no, you can't do that. You don't have an Adam's apple.
That sounds a little sexist, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But
We shall rise.
yes. but your voice in the pyramid on this recording and in that space with the echo and everything, and then the different things you're doing on the violin. Tell us about that, the violin experience and how you were playing that.
Well, there was a part, one of the movements, Dance of the Animals, is about an evolution. And where it starts like amoebas in the water, and then the reptiles, and then the birds. And when we get the flighty of the birds, I said, how am I going to make the violin sound like birds? And so I did like a bow and finger harmonics.
Right.
So I was hitting the bow and at a part in the string where you get a harmonic, and then I was doing some of the notes fingered and some of them were harmonics. And I'm doing them very quickly to try to get them on the pitches that I wanted to hit. So that was one of the things I think you're talking about.
Yeah.
I also did some, of course, bow ricochet things, and there's one sound that Tom did not take out of the album. It's me stomping.
Yeah?
Yeah. He said, you've got to leave your footprint on there.
There you
Because
go.
there was a few times, because I was spinning around and dancing and all this stuff. So there was a few things that needed to be taken out of the recording. But we left a footprint.
How long were you in the chamber or in the pyramid altogether?
I think it was around 2 in the morning when we get in there. I never figured out. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It was about 8:30. It was time to leave.
Wow.
And
you
so
were there for quite a while.
I was. It was time to leave. So I went through all those tunnels, and at the same moment, and we didn't have cell phones then, by the way. At that moment, Fadl Gad was at the gate to let me to unlock the door. And I told him, I said, I don't know what happened last night. I'm not scared anymore, but I heard this big loud bang in there. What's going on in there? And he says, well, that was me locking you in. I said, what'd you lock me in for? He said, for your safety. So I said, okay. So,
Well, luckily he was still there in the morning when you were trying to get out.
well, trust me, he had gone to sleep at the Mina house. Everybody was booked at the Mina house, so he had gone to sleep, but he figured it was time to come and get me. And maybe, you know what? I think they were opening it up to the public. They were opening it up to the public.
Okay.
So he had to come. So he let me stay in there, come to think of it, probably as long as possible.
Yeah, maybe longer than almost anybody ever has.
I don't know.
Yeah. That's exciting.
I don't know.
I've always wanted to go to Egypt and see these places. And I'm always interested in power spots. And I did a project with the Cherokee here years ago to identify and protect Native American sacred sites in the southern Appalachians. And working with some of the Cherokee elders and some other people, I went to some pretty amazing places that had pretty amazing energy, and some strange things happened in some of these places. And do you have any kind of stories other than the fact that you were recording all this and doing all that, any other stories about your experience inside the pyramid that might be a little different or a little interesting for other people?
Well, ironically, the words that I spoke when I was in there, they're not on the album, but the words I spoke was, it's not about going to a high energy place. We already live in a high energy place. It's not about going someplace else. It's just about being. So I come back to New York, and word got out real quick in the New Age community that Stephanie Quinn was inside the Great Pyramid for the harmonic conversion. So I was asked to do interviews and give workshops.
Wow.
Like, guru thing.
Yeah.
So I rode the wave for a while. It's kind of fun,
Yeah.
But I think some areas have atmospheric, and I think some places it's easier for us to feel these things. Like, there's some areas that are just so dense, they're so mentally dense that one has to work very hard to find that place.
Right.
Where you can know a lot.
So your revelation was really, it's all about being, which is very Buddhist.
Is it? Are you a Buddhist?
No, I'm not a Buddhist.
Oh.
But I read about Buddhism, and I read books that are written by Buddhists. I'm reading one right now by a Frenchman named Matthew Ricard, who is a Tibetan Buddhist monk. He's a physicist, a French physicist who became a Tibetan Buddhist monk, and he's written several books now on the connection between physics and Buddhism. Very interesting stuff. So I'm learning, but it's really all about being present in the now and being. Really. So that's it. So,
I saw Tom and Jeff recently in New York.
Yeah.
We went to an exhibit called "The World Is Sound," and it's at the Rubin Museum. And there's a book called "The World Is Sound," and I highly recommend it. When I read this book, it put in writing so many of the things that I had in my dreams, so many of the experiences that I had experienced with sound, and that the sound is the sound of the heart. And it was written by a physicist. It's a fabulous book, a fabulous book. And I don't think Tom has written it. I read it, but when they were doing the mastering, they didn't turn the sound off one time, and I heard Tom's voice say, "So what's the deal with Stephanie and pitch?" So when we all wrapped up, the two of them had sake in New York, and I was sitting there with my mint tea, and we actually had conversations about something other than emails about what needed to be fixed. And in the conversation, I had to ask him, I said, "Well, what did you mean by that?" And he says, "Well, he said, I know somebody who was really good dog breeder, and in this world, bitch is an honorary word, and I would like to call you, I'd like you to be, I'd like to call you the pitch bitch." Is that okay? I said, "Whatever, I don't care." And so he was acutely aware of what I was doing with pitch. And when he made that comment, I was going through my album, listening very carefully to what I was doing. Now the instrumental part of the album is at 448, and I've done a lot of research since what happened in the pyramid, just on my own. But I was applying what I know now, and there's a video on YouTube of me giving a talk about this to a group of music teachers. It's called "The Truth About Rhythm, You Just Can't Beat It." So if you look for my name and "Truth About Rhythm," you'll learn a lot of esoteric things about sound, vibration, and especially pitch. So that night, I did an analysis of it, and the instrumental's at 448. However, the violin and my voice were at 432. And Tom says that's a pitch oftentimes jazz music is centered around. And I also read it's the pitch of the human DNA. Everything has a pitch to it. Everything vibrates. Everything's sound. It's just how condensed is it. So when we're tuning into sound, we're tuning into what creates the material plane. It's sound.
I was just watching a YouTube lecture by a fellow named Dan Winder. And he's a DNA guru, if there ever was one, genius, and he's talking exactly about the kinds of things you are, about the sound and the energies that go into the DNA and the creation of it, and where it goes and what it keeps and throws away and everything else. So it's all very interesting. It's all very, very heavy stuff too, though.
Well, there's some edgy parts, and this was all done kind of intuitively when I was in the pyramid, but there's some edgy parts where I'm singing and playing, but the pitch is going on and off and on and off, and it's creating kind of a beat. So I'm playing with that. Now, those are some of the parts of the album that are a bit edgy.
Yeah, but it's very evident in the album. I mean, those are the things that really drew me into the music was your work with pitch and how amazing it was in that environment, and how that was amplified in that room. So fascinating story and fascinating sound, and I hope that people will be able to. Where can people get your album? How is it being distributed? Because we want people to know about this, and we want them to hear it. So
Well, if you, the most popular sites you can get it at would be CD Baby, and that is the only site where you can actually read a lot about this. Some of the things that we've touched upon today. But you can also get it on iTunes and Amazon Music. Amazon and CD Baby have some more reviews.
Oh, good, good.
So a few people are listening to it, and I help many more. It's available on a broad distribution level through my arrangement with the publisher, the CD Baby.
Mm-hmm. Good. Well, we encourage everybody out there to definitely, go to these places and pick up albums and give them to your friends and take a listen, because it's fascinating. It's fascinating stuff. So what are you doing now? I mean, we're not sitting in the pyramid here. We're in the woods here in Jackson County, and what is on your agenda these days? What are you doing with the music and otherwise?
Well, I've had some thoughts about maybe teaching the overtone singing. I'm thinking there might be a group that would be interested in learning this. I'm now in a house that has a huge studio, so I can fit about 45 people as an audience. And I'm teaching, and every month we do like a performance class there. And it's beautiful. It looks like a little recital hall. So I'm concentrating on my teaching. I have to pay the bills, so I'm playing gigs and orchestra, percolating ideas for some new music. I'm hoping that intuitively I'll be connecting with the right people to have this in a film. I have some more meetings with ballet people who have heard this and are interested, so that'll be interesting.
Yeah, who are you working with in terms of the dance community?
I don't like to say anything until something's really happening.
Okay.
But something percolating in Charlotte.
Oh, in Charlotte.
Yes,
okay.
And a few things in New York and Chicago. But these things, I've been told just to be patient. I've been told just, Stephanie, concentrate on your teaching. I teach violin and piano and voice and songwriting. And just be patient with the process, because sometimes it takes a couple of years before anything really happens. Because the ballet companies and film companies, they already have their plans. So that they're getting my music sitting their ear now, it may be 2 years from now before it lands in a film or on a stage someplace, maybe even longer.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, I've worked with dancers before, and that's exciting to watch your work. In my case, it would be my words have motion and movement. I mean, and how those people interpret that in terms of bodily movement and function. That's pretty exciting to watch that happen. So, hopefully you'll have a similar experience with the people you're working with. Yeah.
They're talking about doing the productions in art galleries.
Yeah.
So there'll be a visual aspect to it.
Yeah. What else can you tell us about where you've been and what you've done that you'd like to share with all of us today? Anything that we haven't touched on that...
Well, I can tell you something a little bit interesting along those lines of the right time and the right place. When I orchestrated part of the pyramid music, again, I kind of heard it in my brain. I said, okay, hit the pause button and let's pick this up tomorrow. And I started to hear this piece orchestrated, the three movements. So I called a local high school conductor, and I called Peter Rosugar, and I said, if I write a symphony, will you have the kids play it? He said, yes, I will. And I said, good. Then I made another call, and I called a friend of mine named John Novi, who can listen to music and come up with all the meters and time signatures and everything. I said, if I send you some clips, can you give it notation? I'm going to orchestrate it. And he says, I'm here. So I started writing for nonstop for about 6 weeks. My kids did not have a Christmas. And there was a flood going on at the same time. So I was in the basement where the computer was and learning how to do the composing and all this. So a few years later, when Chicago was making its bid for the Olympics, there was a call out to composers to submit music for the opening ceremonies and such. So I thought, what the heck, why not? So I had the score, so I sent it in, and you know what? They picked mine.
Wow. That's a story.
I know, that's a story. I was
Yeah.
like, and I have a letter, you know, I mean, it was really happened.
Yeah.
And we didn't win the bid for the Olympics, but it made me start thinking that I might take myself seriously as a composer and as a creative musician. Yeah, I had put the whole pyramid stuff aside because of technology and the noise and the background noise and all that stuff. So I was really focusing on that. But then that fell through, and otherwise, I'd be very famous
Right.
if we had won the bid for the Olympics. So I moved to Asheville, and Asheville's kind of a magical place.
In what sense do you mean that?
It's like New York City. When I became an empty nester, I thought, where am I going to go? And I had sort of thought maybe New York City. I'd go back there because this was where a lot of things happened for me. And then I was introduced to Asheville. And I had a similar feeling, that general warmth and friendliness that I love in New York, and a creative spirit, and meeting so many creative and bright, intelligent, fabulous people. And found very quickly that my talents were welcome here, that there was a need for me here, perhaps even more so than Chicago. Because when I left Chicago, things were going very well, but I was looking for a change. So I came here in 2014, and in 2015, just a year, I was invited to have my piece, 24-minute piece, performed at the Asheville Composers Concert. And Jason DeCristofaro is in charge of that. And he said, you're going to have to squeeze a full orchestra part down, and I did, to a quartet, timpani and snare. String quartet, timpani and snare. And a venue opened up all of a sudden. It was big enough because they never had a big group or a big long piece. And that all opened up, Streamside Concerts. So it landed on a very auspicious day, June 19th, which I have since learned is the Black Independence Day. This is the day when the slaves were really freed. It was on June 19th. It also was the day, that week was electrifying. That was when the Charleston church killings happened. And at 6 o'clock that night, it was on the news that the church members forgave the killer. And at 9 o'clock, my piece went up. And it's about racism.
Another one of those coincidences.
I didn't leak out the story about it, but
Right.
I did mention that it had to do with prejudice and people accepting each other and so forth. And that there's a story beginning, middle, and end. And it was I was very, very pleased with the musicians. They listened to the Pyramid tape. Must have listened to it a lot. Because we had 2 rehearsals, and what you hear on the album is the actual concert live. And they really got it. They really got it.
That's
I'm
exciting.
very, very, very proud. Taya Richter, Francis Duff, Jan Daughtery, John Malloy, Jason DeCristofaro, and Victoria Nelson. What a team. Very proud of you.
Yeah.
So it was like I had a baby that night. I was watching. Jason wanted me to play. And I said, there's no way I'm going to play this. I need to hear it because I'd heard an orchestra, high school orchestra play it, but I needed to hear this in a small arrangement and be on the outside. So it was really thrilling, and my daughter came in for it because it was a moment. You know, it's all fun for a composer to hear their work played. It's rare, and it's very, very difficult for a composer to have their music played if it's involving a number of musicians.
Right. Well, it's so nice when everything comes together that way, and then you get to experience it in that sort of way as well. So, what is your connection with the environment? We started talking about it a little bit earlier, and then the song that you sang for us. has a lot of environmental metaphors and things in it, lines in it. How does the music and your sense of consciousness and awareness tie into, say, the environment and what's going on in the world these days?
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I became most aware of it through Paul Winter and listening to his album, putting the music in with the Dolphins, and the songs we were learning were of Indian sounding, like the one you heard me sing before. There's also a Russian song that Susan cued me, and I'll sing it real quick. If the people lived their lives as if it were a song for singing out of light, provides the music for the stars to be dancing circles in the night. And this idea of music and the environment and nature and all these things coming together and taking care of our consciousness, taking care of the animals, taking care of the environment, it was all coming together. And visionaries in New York like Peter Wiley and different people, we were all hanging out together, coming up with ideas for events and fundraisers. And I actually played for a fundraiser for the Dalai Lama.
Whoa.
I did, and Philip Glass was on the program. I didn't play with him, but I played on the same program with him.
That's close enough.
And then I later met the Dalai Lama too.
Really?
I was supposed to play for his 59th birthday.
Well, that's
And
amazing.
yeah, Fred Siegel was building a temple in Malibu, and there was a groundbreaking or something, or Dalai Lama came to see the ground. They didn't build the temple, but they did. Dalai Lama did come. And Fred Siegel said, bring your violin, I want you to perform for this. So I brought my violin, and it's early in the morning again. These wonderful things happen early in the morning, don't they? I mean, the rest of the world's sleeping, and we're just like out there having adventures.
There you go.
So I bring my violin, and the Dalai Lama says to me, he says, you're not going to play today. We have something special for you. I said, what's that? He said, did something with his hands, and then the monks started praying. And he said, it's a breakfast prayer. So they're praying, and I'm hearing tones in my head, and it was awesome. And there was also a giddiness in the atmosphere of everybody who was there for that event. It was almost like a percolating, bubbling, like you're about to crack up laughing.
Right.
And I was there at the head table, and I'm like this.
Well, it's like this Matthew Ricard I was telling you about. He's the Dalai Lama's translator.
Oh.
And one of his books is called Happiness. This is the book I'm reading at the moment, and it's like you say, that you're in the moment, you're being, and it's giddiness. I mean, that's the appropriate reaction, the appropriate response. And when you see the Dalai Lama, you always see him smiling and happy and making fun and making jokes. So I mean, must be something to all that. So with the time that we have left, which is just a couple minutes, is there anything that you'd like to add to our conversation in terms of the album or anything, your project you're working on now, or all of the above?
Yeah. Well, I could tell you that if someone listened to this the first time and they had their eyes shut, and afterwards the colors were brighter, and it caused a kundalini experience in her back, and then she shared the music with her art students and asked them to write down their impressions, write down words. And she sent me the list, and it was the storyline. It was the storyline. So I think this is kind of music you can, especially the orchestrated part that has a storyline, any of it, that you can listen to it and have fun with the impressions that you get while you're listening to these sounds. And I hope that my listeners will be able to get some idea what it's like to be in that space. And I'm hoping that I communicated that through the music.
Well, thank you for coming in today and sharing with us your storyline.
You're welcome.
And all the storylines of all the different aspects of your experience in life. And I hope you'll come back again and
Thank you.
talk with us. So And all of you out there, please come back and join us for the next session of Culture Hour, when we'll have another guest from the arts here in Western North Carolina. And I want to thank again our guest this morning, Stephanie Quinn. And go out and look for her album, it's the Saqqara Suite.
CD Baby, Amazon Music, iTunes.
Right.